Hi everybody, welcome to Will Alexander's Dog Show Tips, brought to you by Canine Chronicle TV. Today on the interview chair we have Geir Flyckt-Pedersen. So sit back and relax and listen to Geir for an hour or so. I had a great time. Hi everybody, today our special guest is Geir Flyckt-Pedersen. How are you, sir?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. This interview scares me a little bit, but...
It can't scare you. We were chatting just before this and you were going on and on, and so you can't stop now. So, how's the pandemic treating you? And the winter?
So far good, actually. You know, I just spoke to some friends yesterday who have been in hospital, but I'm staying in isolation. I'm bored to death, but other than that, it's fine. You know, I think we are lucky to be alive and lucky to have a house to live in and have food and not have to worry about anything.
Oh, exactly.
So we have nothing to complain about. And what I hope is that the vaccine is happening very soon.
Well, it's out there now. We just have to distribute it. So.
Yeah, a lot of my Scandinavian friends and European friends have been lucky already and been shot. So.
Well, they're saying they should be able to get up to 70% by September or something like that. So.
That's my birthday, so that's when it's going to happen.
Okay, and how's the winter treating you? I see your.
You know, I moved up here because of a fire ant allergy that you might have heard about. So I had to abandon Florida because I was in a 3 days induced coma because of anaphylactic reaction to fire ants. And then I had one little incident after that, and then I thought, no, I'm not risking that. When I was told I had to stay within 10 minutes of an emergency room all the time, even with an EpiPen in my pocket. So. Then I realized that Florida might not be for me.
I like the winter, so.
You do?
I do, yeah, I do.
Yeah, I have
like the 4 seasons, so.
No, I don't mind sun and warmth.
All right.
I'm Norwegian. I was used to snow. You know, I hated it.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start. Tell me how old you were and how you got started in the world of dogs.
I got my first dog when I was 7 years old. It was a mutt. We got her at 3 weeks old from my then girlfriend, Maiken, who was 6. And they had a black bitch called Queenie that had roamed around town a little while and met somebody she liked very much. And she had a litter of 4 puppies. And when she was 3 weeks old, I got her. But that was on recommendation because just before that, I had been bitten by a wire fox terrier.
Oh, jeez.
And so I had to change my route to school every morning. And I was actually, for a while, scared of dogs.
Oh, no.
And some in my family wish I still was.
But it was a wire fox terrier that bit you?
That was a wire fox terrier. And thinking about it back, you know, he was probably playing with me because he grabbed my heel and my pants. And so he was probably very harmless, but... I was a afraid little boy, so...
Oh, for sure.
I thought it was an attack.
When did the world of purebred dogs start for you?
Actually, I started...
The bite of the wire fox terrier.
No, the wire fox terrier. I mean, I happened to meet... I went to training classes with this mongrel, and there I met a lot of people with different dogs and different breeds, and particularly there was a lady who had a boxer that she couldn't take care of, couldn't handle him. He was wild and wonderful, and so I became his co-owner, and he was the first dog I showed in 1959 when I was 12 years old.
It's amazing. Excuse me a second. Sorry. It's amazing how many interviews I've done. People have started with boxers.
Yeah, but I co-owned him. He didn't live with me, but I showed him, I trained him, and all that kind of stuff. And then when I was busy with him, I also met another lady who had just become a widow, and she had a German Shepherd whose name was Rex, and she needed help with him, so I took him to training classes in the German Shepherd Club. Oh. And that is when so my interest in German Shepherd has existed. Both breeds have existed for forever and ever, you know. So I attended every German Shepherd Club in Norway that I could probably attend, and the same with any boxer event that I could take part in. And you know, I lived in Bergen. There were not that many dog shows there. So whether it was for sporting dogs or for we had a Bergen Selskaps- and Brukshund-Klubb, which was an all-breed club. And they had one annual dog show, and we had one German Shepherd dog show, and we had a gun dog club show. So these were basically the 3 or 4 dog shows we had in Bergen. So when I got my first wire, that was in 1963, because then my parents wouldn't let me have Airedales. And because Pardon?
Why no Airedales? Why did your parents not want?
Because we lived in an apartment and they thought it was too big.
Oh, okay.
And it was also a weird thing, because my mentor in terriers was the lady I met through the dog club. And I had seen a neighbor who had this big black and tan poodle-looking thing full of hair one day, and the next day I saw it hairless. And I think, what the hell has happened to it? And they told me that it's trimmed. And I said, clipped? No, they plucked them. And I thought, bloody hell, this is horrible. So when at the next meeting in our dog club, we were asked, everybody in the junior section were asked if we had any special interest or something we would like to do. And I put my hand up and said, I would like to know how to pluck a terrier. And then Mrs. Nagelgård, who was an Airedale breeder, took me under her wings. And she was very kind. She reorganized her grooming schedule so that, because she only groomed dogs she bred herself. But so instead of doing them in the morning, she did them after my school hours a couple of times a week. Oh, and I sat there on a stool I was 12 years at the time, for 2 years before she gave me a stripping knife. And she wouldn't let me strip an Airedale first. I was, the first breed I trimmed totally was a giant Schnauzer.
Oh, wow.
And that happened also to be a couple of years later, the first dog I ever won a group with. And that's also a breed that has been close to my heart ever since. And I showed a lot of them in Norway, and I even made up my own English champion when we lived in England.
They're very striking. I watched you judge them a couple of years ago in Florida, and it was a lot of fun to watch you judge them.
Yeah, I love the breed, and that is probably my favorite breed. I mean,
oh, really?
Yeah, I think our dog, his registered name was Champion Paris Garden William, and he was wonderful when he was around you, but when he was in his run, he was a tiger. So everybody thought he was nasty, and his pet name was George, and everybody thought he was named after George Wall. And I said no. So, but he was a great dog, and
so the Wire Fox Terriers. When did they start then?
They started. I bought my for Lady Lou, who is the foundation. Was the foundation? It started in 1963. Mm-hmm. I had a friend who had a dog called Teddy, and she was bred to a bitch called Ginny, and I got the runt of the litter, and we had another Airedale, very prolific Airedale breeder in Norway who happened to come to visit Bergen to go to a dog show, and she looked at this little thing, and she said to me, do you know you can shape this dog to become something? And I said, what do you mean? Yeah, you put it on the table every day, you put it in the shape you want it to look, you put the tail in, and then you walk it and try to get the same attitude and on the move as you have on the table. And that's what I did with this little thing. So she never won much, but she became the mother of my first champion. And then I realized after 2 generations that why should I start up at this level when I could buy for very little money a huge progress and move forward.
Mm.
So that was what happened a few years later.
Well, tell us about that. Who did you buy from first?
The first, that's funny because I worked with a lady called Åsa Toften, and we also worked with a Danish guy called Bengt Smith, and he imported a lot of dogs from St. Erm in England and from Cavemen and other famous kennels, and also Welsh Terriers from Kedwayne. And those were the ones I then started with, but I really restarted again in Royal Fox Terriers in 1974 when I married Gerd Ohm, who was already a well-established cocker breeder. And I'd bred cockers for many years before that. And she didn't want me in the cocker ring, so she initiated that. Even if I brought a few wires with me, she said, you should take up wires again. So I went to Joe Cartledge and visited Liz, and the first bitch I bought again was one called Laven Lazy Girl. And what was really annoying was that I tried initially to buy her sire. And that sire I missed by 2 days. And his name was Seawire Elsewire Marksman. And he was purchased by Pam Running in Canada.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yes. But I got this daughter by him. So I kept in touch with Pam Running for a few years after that, and he produced some good stuff for her.
Yeah, she had some good dogs for a while there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there are Canadian connections, yes.
Yes, we had another one. We talked earlier about Newt Egberg.
Yeah, he was a great guy, rather disorganized, but he was a great dog man.
Yeah.
And when I decided that it was decided for me that I couldn't have Airedales because of his size, I tried to buy a carrier from him, and he had 2 puppies at the time, and he asked 250 Norwegian kroners, which is probably like $40 or something for the puppy at the time. And I said, just give me 2 weeks to save up this money, get this money together. I was 12 years old at the time or something like that. And so when I finally called him to tell him that he can send the dog now, I have the money, he said, oh, I'm sorry, I sold him yesterday.
Oh.
So then I bought this wild bitch, Lady Lou, and the rest is history,
Mm-hmm. What's the history we want to know about? So you can't just push over it like that. I want to know everything, Geir.
Yeah, I have no secrets, no. And then I bred wires for and I kept some of my old stock when I moved to Sweden in 1975. I bought them with me, veterans and stuff, so I had a continuous line from them. But I restarted altogether in Sweden. And,
what did you start with? What kennels did you start with in Sweden?
Well, that was the Laven Lazy Girl that I just mentioned.
Okay.
It was by Elsewhere Marksman. And the other foundation bitch that I bought was a girl from... I tried to buy a dog called Harrowville Huntsman from England, who won Best in Show at Craft Sale later. And Peter Green was also after him, and any person who had common sense would try to buy that dog. And he was lovely, and he was bred and owned by Evelyn House, who lived in the middle of London, or rather on Harrow Hill, in a little tiny backyard, but she had something like 30 or 40 dogs there at times. And she also bred, I think, apricot poodles to support the wires for a while. And I knew that if I bought dogs from her, they would have to have decent temperament, in addition to, and they had wonderful temperament, and they had brought with them some problems that I had to breed out later. But I bought 3 dogs from her altogether, I think, yeah.
And you showed a lot of dogs as well. Like I've seen pictures of Lakelands and obviously wires.
Well, the Lakeland was a gift from Mrs. Howard. She was Peter's client. You remember Carlotta Howard? So that was a huge Peter client for many years. And actually, it was my wife who fell in love with Brassy.
Okay.
So we got her to Sweden, and she did tremendously well because she won I think the groups, several terrier groups, after she came to Sweden. And then she went best in show at the Skansen show, which is similar to the Montgomery here. She won that. And runner-up was my wife was shown the Lakeland. I was runner-up with a wire, and I was really pissed off. But but that was good. That she was so thrilled because a couple of weeks, no, the year before, we actually showed in Helsinki in Finland, and I went best in show with a wire fox terrier, and my wife was runner-up with a cocker out of 4,000 dogs.
Oh wow!
And she would never forgive me that, you know. So, but after this Skansen show, she finally decided that she had her revenge. So Brassy was basically hers, and she also won. She became an English champion. First, she went through quarantine to come to Sweden. Then she was one of the 35 dogs we took with us and put in quarantine when we moved to England. And
what year did you move to England?
Pardon?
What year did you move to England?
1983. Okay. We bought a company over there called Scandia Trailers, and I was able to work from home, so we bought a farm outside London, where we had loads and loads of American visitors. I can tell you, we had. If you read our guest book, it's just like reading like who is who in the dog world, which is fantastic.
Oh, exactly. That'd be exciting. I see trophies over your shoulder. What trophy is that?
That is the trophies you see there.
Yeah.
If you see them all.
No,
the horrible one in the center with a piece of wood below it, underneath it, is the Norwegian Dog of the Year, and the one to the side of them are the Swedish Dog of the Year. And we called the Golden Dogs, the Golden Dog. And I was the first in history to win Dog of the Year, both in Norway and Sweden.
With which dog?
Same year. That was an import black-tailed dog, black-tailed Starbright, that I bought from Harry O'Donnell. Mm-hmm. And on the other side is the second one that the first one was the Welsh Terrier, a dog called Deborah Janor, who was also Nordic Dog of the Year. He won Best in Show in all Scandinavian countries, and one more Best in Show in 1 year, I think, than any dog had done until then.
Wow.
And but then we repeat, and he was the first to do it, and then I did it again with Starbright. So I didn't breed any of them, but it's so funny because when I first saw Starbright at Crufts with Harry O'Donnell, I saw these dogs standing in there. So I ran over to my friends and said, "Come on here, you have to look at this dog." And they all come over. I don't want to mention them by name because it's kind of embarrassing. And because they came to the ringside and said, "Which one?" And for me, it was only this one dog in there standing with one leg in each corner and looking fantastic. I was never able to get the collar back on him that he had that day, but I eventually got to buy him, and he produced a lot of. Temperament was his strongest side. He gave us a lot of winners, but also a few problems. So.
Okay. So what other trophies do you have there? I see there's lots of stuff behind you. So.
If you turn that way, can you see all those?
Oh yeah.
Those are my best in show at the Swedish Terrier Club shows. Now I think there are 22 of them on that shelf, and there are some missing. But lots to brag about and think about now that we're getting older.
So who do you consider your mentors in the sport then, Geir?
Well, it's so difficult because my original mentor on my inaugural go was the Adelbreeder that took me under her wing. And then from then I moved, when I started in Wires, I was constantly in touch with Mrs. Bergendahl in Oslo. I still remember her old telephone number, 535329. That's only 50 years ago or something. And then from then it became Ernie Sharp, and from then on it became Rick and Peter and George, and so I learned from them along the way, and my dream was for many years to be able to go to America and show dogs.
When did you first come to America then?
The first time I was in America was actually Westminster, 1979.
Okay.
So
were you showing or
no. We were just
just visiting, just watching?
visiting. Yeah, but I loved it. And on that trip, that was the last time I smoked because we had such a horrible flight back to Scandinavia. And I thought, if these wings stay on this plane all the way to Copenhagen,
you'll quit smoking.
I'm quit smoking, and I did.
Good for you.
Yeah.
So how many times you wanted to show dogs in America? When was the first time you showed a dog in America then?
I hardly ever. I won Best of Breed at Westminster 1982 with a dog that Peter had over here that showed for me. And but I never showed many dogs over here. I helped George occasionally. You know, we spent a lot of summers with George. Everybody thought he was such a bad loser and stuff, which he probably was to a certain extent, but he was so wonderful to us and the family. And, he showed a lot of dogs that I shipped over here to him. Mm. And Ross did too. And so we spent a number of summers in Constantine, Michigan, and at Mackinac Island.
Well, I loved Constantine.
Fabulous Muscle family.
He was raised just down the road from here, Oakville, Ontario. That's he used to. My first kennel was on the 5th line, and George would tell me he used to ride his bike by it to go fishing. So I'd hear stories.
Yeah, he was still a biker when I met him. He loved his bike, and he kept in great shape. He used his trampoline, and he played golf as often as he possibly could.
Yeah, for sure.
He's the only person I know that had been beaten by a blind golfer, but that is a different story. We were Peter Green and Tommy Glass. You can erase this if you want later.
Oh, this is good stuff.
Good story. Tommy Glassford, Peter Green, and George Ward and Ross were staying with us in England. And I got a phone call this morning from a guy that I played golf with on a regular basis called Derek Sheridan. He was legally blind, but he was, he could see partly. So he said, Geir, I missed 3 players. We have the Blinders Golf Associations at Aspect Park today. Do you think you could find somebody to come up? I said, I have 2 golfers here, Tommy and George, and I will actually, if you can take all 3 of us, we will come, otherwise I can't do it. And Peter walked around with us anyway. So we come up there and we were all given an opponent, a blind golfer in our team. And so I went out one, I think Tommy went out first and I did, and third was George. And just before I tee off, I heard George go up to this guy saying, why don't we make this a little more interesting? He said, what about a side bet? And the guy said, yes, sir, that's okay. And he had his wife with him as a guide. So, and what do you say about £5 front, £5 back, and £5 overall? So for £15 altogether, is that okay? The proper Englishman said to him, yeah, that's fine, George said. And everything went fine. We went in, and I can't remember the results, but Bob, Tommy and I and Peter were in the bar. And in the door comes Mr. Ward, with smoke coming out of both ears. And I said to him, what happened? Don't tell me you lost to that blind man. And he said, he wasn't fucking blind. I should have noticed on the first tee, he asked his wife, where should I aim? And she pointed at the tree 300 yards up the fairway. So whenever we played golf after that, and George was in the process of beating me, I just mentioned that, George, I had a friend who was beaten by a blind golfer, and that made him so angry. It was amazing. So, but we had a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun on the golf course, and so he was the one who introduced me to golf, actually, because they all played golf. Yes, because they all played golf on Mackinac Island during the dog days. Were you out there?
I was there once.
Yeah, and I was there every year for a number of years, and one year he said to me, why don't you go back to England and have some lessons and come back here? So I rang up a friend of mine who I knew owned the golf course and said, how do I get golf lessons? Should never have done that. I was hooked for years and years and years. And then I cheated a little bit because we had I can't remember what the side bet was, but I didn't make the dead timeline, but I lied to him, so I got my money. And then next year we come back to Mackinac, and Eric, my son, had golf lessons at the same time. And he tees off and I tee off, and George turns around to me and said, "Why the F didn't you have lessons from the same guy who taught him?" So anyway, that was fun, and that brought us together. We made me the friendship with Bob and Jane and all these other Cappy, Michelle Billings' husband, and a lot of other the nicest people in the world. When you so,
yes, wow.
We were just as competitive on the golf course as they were on the.
Oh, I know. My first wife and I, Allison, went to Dog Days. George invited us up there, and the first day we didn't golf. Neither one of us golfed. So we actually stayed inside with Ricky. Ricky was in there. So they played, and I guess the first day George's team won, and then then they started betting money, and Janie's team won when they started betting money. So.
Oh yeah, it was pretty good. And then you had, of course, you had a lot of other people up there. You had Gene Heath, who was just as competitive as most of us. And for some funny reason, George hated losing to her, but he hated losing to anybody, so that didn't matter. But he did the way to watch him grooming a dog and go over the coat and all the kinds of was a fantastic experience.
Oh, yeah. Whenever I go to Michigan, he'd come over and see whatever gun dog I was showing, and he was spot on everything he said, and he would even tell me certain things I should change on it. Mm-hmm. He was in my opinion, he was much nicer than he was given credit for. But of course, he wanted to own Michigan and Indiana and these areas that he showed dogs in all the time. So, but we used to, the longest time we'd drive by his dad's kennel, and the runs were you could still see the remnants of the kennel. It's gone now, but you could see it in the QEW as you drove by where Ted Ward's kennel was. Our trophy up here is the Ted Ward trophy still. So Terrier breeders, yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. Okay, so we got a bit off track there. That's okay.
Yeah. You can erase that.
No, I like that stuff. That's the things that people want to hear. So when did you start judging then, Geir?
I started judging at open show level in the 70 something, I can't remember, and did a lot of breed shows and open shows in England. And then after we moved to England, I started judging. But I've never been judging has never been my main ambition. I love the breeding and showing thing, and raising puppies and training puppies. So, and I think it's, I know it's very un-American right now to say this, but I think I want to know what I'm doing. Even in my own breeds, you come across things at times that you wonder how we're going to deal with it, But we grew up in a world, for instance, when it comes to breeding dogs, that in terriers and wild fox terriers, we didn't know how to fix anything or do anything. We bred them, the ones who had something wrong with their ears or their tails or anything else, they went as pets, and then there was selective breeding. And I'm so proud of the fact that the last probably 5-6 generations I bred, you didn't even have to set the ears, you just kept them natural, and I'm so happy that so many of my dogs are still in pedigrees around the world because they were what you saw. While in fox terriers there was a lot of fixing and minor and larger operations all the time. So it was more of a challenge, but you also felt that you deserved what you achieved. Right? You see what I mean?
We had blind dogs in Canada being shown. That Pemberton dog was here for a while. That Sonia.
No, you had a dog. I sold 2 dogs to Canada. Probably.
Did Sonia buy them both?
Pardon?
Did Sonia Sparling buy them both?
Yeah, but she bought first one dog called Pinnacle, and then.
So I showed one of them for her.
Yeah, that was probably Peabody. And Peabody was the one she had as a replacement because I think she had an accident and he was killed, the first one, Pinnacle. And he won a few Best in Shows in Canada with her handling. And then Peabody, I can't remember what she called me or cried, or she was very, very upset. So I sent her a dog that I had intended to keep myself. And from a very, very successful litter, actually, you know. His brother was the first dog that called Lulan Peterman that Gabriel showed and did a lot of winning with. The first wire fox terrier, owned by Kathy Regis.
Well, that was litter-mate to Sonia's dog then?
That
was litter-mate to Sonia's dog?
Yes, he was litter-mate to Sonia's dog. And then the Bismarck Kennel, who's a huge kennel in Germany, they had a third brother who also had been produced a lot of good stuff.
Wow.
So that was so I don't know. And then he was sold to some person in America. I'm talking Peabody, and he ended up with Dennis Sprung.
Oh.
Dennis Springer.
Dennis Springer. Okay.
Not Dennis Sprung.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so difficult for me to keep these names apart, and then he did a little bit of winning, and a few people used him, but he more or less disappeared from the scene. Okay.
I should call Bouvier's for Sonia and the one wire dog. I can't remember anything else, but she's still around. What's that?
But I was told that she sold him because she was terminally ill with cancer or something, so I thought she wasn't around anymore.
Well, she's still around.
Yeah, I think Luke told me that actually.
Okay. Yeah, I think Luke showed for her as well.
Yeah, he showed a Peabody dog, I think.
Yeah. Okay. And when did you move to America? What year?
Well, I moved in 2005 in November.
Okay.
And with only a couple of whippets, four whippets I think we brought with us. So, but my son studied here for all these years, and first he went to Denver, University of Denver, and then he went to Stanford, and where he met this fabulous girl that he is married to, and the reason why he lives in Cleveland and why I'm in Ohio right now.
Where exactly in Ohio are you?
I'm in Pepper Pike, which is just maybe 10 miles outside Cleveland.
Oh, okay. You get snow. So yeah. What about what would be the funny things that happened to you in the ring? Do you remember anything that's happened to you in the ring?
Well, the most embarrassing thing that happened to me in the ring was in the late 60s, I think it was. I was showing an Airedale in Kristiansand in Norway, and we had a judge in Norway called, a very prim and proper guy called Tore Edmund. He suffered from alopecia, and so but he always had this fabulous wig on. And when he bent down to look at her teeth, she looked up and she jumped up and grabbed this wig.
I could tell that was going.
But that was not. She actually won the breed, but he just very embarrassed put the wig back to front, and so that was the most embarrassing thing, that I embarrassed him, in a way. But other than that, there's not been a lot of.
What about when you're judging? Have you had any funny things happen when you're judging?
Oh yes, but my favorite story is actually one that I keep telling everybody. Is when we first moved to England, I judged an open show, and in Surrey, and in a big open class, any variety, I placed a standard poodle second, and I happen to know the lady, and I happen to know that who she was, and all that kind of stuff. So, being Scandinavian, I was stupid enough to go up because we always have to explain what we do. So I told her about that. The bitch was nice, and she was very attractive, but maybe she could have a little better feet and a little better tail set. But other than that, she was lovely. And whereupon she looks at me and she said, "Well, Mr. Pedersen, you're not exactly an oil painting yourself."
Oh, really? That's good.
So that is, but yeah, there has been a lot of little things people have said and all that kind of stuff. But normally, you know, one thing that I can't understand is people are so sensitive about things
Right.
over here compared to, you know, we don't have any field reps. So we don't have, and normally the things that happen in the ring, if there's anything to complain about, you have to go back home and then you have to write a letter and include a check over X amount of money. And so when you come to that point, you just forget about it. And
That's the same up here. We have no field rep.
Yeah. So it's kind of, but I think a lot of these stories have been very funny, you know, and
Exactly. Yeah.
so and we've had so many. My favorite story is one Andrew Brace used to tell us from England. But this Dexon lady, she went to the same show week after week after week, and the same lady won every class. And finally, she came to a dojo where the judge reversed the placing. And she went up to him and she said, "Congratulations, darling. But I must admit, I never knew your dog was co-hopped, but I've never seen him from this angle before."
That's good.
That's pretty good. So that is fantastic. But you know, breeding dogs, I think we should talk a little about breeding dogs, how clever we are, and how much luck comes into it. I was fortunate enough to buy a couple of bitches from a lady called Miss Elsie Williams, who also wrote a book about the Royal Fox Terrier. And I bought first one bitch from her, and then I talked her into breeding her champion bitch to Gals of Excellence, you know.
Yeah.
And but she was 90 years old or something at the time, so she said that, "Well, if I can't take care of the puppies, you have to take them." I said, I'll take them. So we went down to Devon, where she lived, and looked at the litter, and we picked up the doe we had, and then and that litter was that bitch we picked from that litter, I gave her to my mentor in Norway later on. She became the English champion, and I had 3 litters from her. And then because I would never, if I could avoid it, let any dog have to live their entire life in a kennel. I would like them to have a life. Mm-hmm. I gave her to Mrs. Bergendal, my mentor in Norway, where she slept on the bed for many years. And she also became dog of the year in Norway at 5-6 years old. And but she is the mother of these dogs, Peabody and Pacific and Peterman that we talked about earlier on.
Yes. Okay.
So and the other one, and the reason I picked her was that my son dropped her on the floor. And she's the only one in that litter who has made any mark in any Fox Terrier history. And she is in basically every Fox Terrier pedigree, I think, if you go far enough back.
Wow.
They have today. Wow. And the funny thing was that Mrs. Williams, who was when I came down there to look at that litter, and I picked the dog and a bitch, she said, "I will call you in a couple of days if I can't manage this." So she called me up for 2 days and said, "Mr. Pedersen, you have to come down and get these puppies." "I can't come down," I said, "but you can send them up." So she sent them up, and I picked them up at the station, and then the next day come a telephone call. "I haven't got any money from you yet." I said I wasn't going to buy them, I was going to sell them for you. Well, in just the same day, we had this couple coming along, and they wanted one of the puppies. We just going to make sure it had all the vet papers and all the stuff we wanted them to have before they went. So they were coming back the next day. So 2 days later, I got a phone call from Mrs. Williams. "You have to send the puppies back. I want them back." So I said, "Yeah, but I sold one of them." "I don't care," she said, "I want them back." So we had to let these people have Trixie, the one that we later became such a famous bird.
Oh, wow.
So off she went. 3 months later, I sit having breakfast with my wife, and I said, do you know what? I'm going to check up on Trixie and see what's happening to her. I called the number to these people, and the mother lifts the phone and said, oh, she cried, because her daughter had been seriously injured in a car accident the day before. And they were just going to put an ad in the local paper to sell the bitch.
Get rid of Trixie, oh jeez.
Yeah, Trixie, yes. And I was lucky enough to have some people, some wild folks, other people that bought dogs from me and show dogs nearby. And I said, grab a bunch of cash and go and get her. So they did that. So then she came back to us. And if you ever see a picture of a wild fox terrier on a stamp from Monaco, that's Trixie.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
She was almost placed in a home. But
yes, she was sold and came back. And all these things that happened to her is what makes this so wonderful. And the others, I have another dog, a dog called Lulline Pickled Pepper, who is in virtually every pedigree. He was the grandsire of the litter she produced with Pacific and all that stuff is. And he was Rick Shashudin, remember him?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he stayed with us a number of times. And I introduced him to a dog. We took him down to Jokiel Kennels where Mary Swash. She was handling a dog called the Silea Special Edition. And
George.
So because he had an Airedale then that was top Airedale in the country here right then. And I said, you want to see Mary's Airedale? So we went down there and so I said, show him George. And he went bananas. And so he bought him. But then, so we took him home to Lambridge from Crufts, where we lived.
This is a special edition, George.
The special edition, yes. I had first refusal on him. But so he came to Lambridge Farm. And we had this little bitch called another Penda bitch, Penda Picturesque. He was in season, and I had used George before, and I was very unhappy with the coats. And but my wife talked me into using him, and that produced this little dog called Lulline Pickled Pepper, who everybody loved, and he didn't do all that much winning, but everybody used him. He was type personified, you know.
Yeah.
And when he was a little boy, he was. I was thinking about selling him because he was so heavily marked. And then Peter's wife, Gaynor, come along and she said, you can't do that, he's so lovely. And so we kept him. But I take all credit for all this, you know. So then and so, you know, it's a lot of things happening in your life. Do you think you can say whatever happened? I trimmed the dogs and I groomed them, I showed them and I trained them and did all that, you know. But a lot of it happens because there's some kind of luck involved.
Oh, there's no question. There's no luck and timing. There's no question.
Yeah, we had another very exciting story. Was when we had this whippet bitch that we got. You know, we bought a couple of dogs from a guy called Bo Bengtsson. You know him?
Yes.
Yes. Pinza and Lanza, and Mario and Lanza was their names. And we bought males because we would never want to breed whippets because we had greyhounds, we had fox terriers, we had English cockers. So anyway, this lady, Pip Campbell, who had me found here, brought a champion bitch to him, and we had a bitch called Mithlander Sweet Soprano. I told us that. And just when we were going back to Sweden, she was in season. And we had come back from Crufts early because we were in the middle of moving more or less. And so we watched Best in Show on television. So I said to my wife, before we go, even if we have to make a trip to Scotland, we should breed to this dog. And so we did. So I called up Maura Bolton around him, and she said, do you know, Geir, I'm coming to London tomorrow for a charity thing, you know, of being on television. So we met at Heathrow Airport and bred a bitch behind some cars there, and then, of course, 9 weeks later, she had a litter of 5, and that's the best whippet litter we ever bred. And when you think about how things fall into place, you think this was meant to be.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, that's true.
And all 5 puppies in that litter became champions, and one of them that went to Norway, to Arne Foss. Have you met him?
Who?
Arne Foss.
No.
He's a Norwegian all-rounder, the nicest guy you should ever bring to Scotland. He had one of the puppies, and from her he bred a bitch that became dog of the year in Norway a couple of years later. So sometimes you have lucky.
Cockers.
Pardon?
What about your English cockers?
You know, we had a lot. That was really what brought us together, because we met in the cockering, and I spent more times in England with cocker breeders than with any other breeders, and I adopted a couple of parents in England called Joyce and George Caddy, whose books, they both wrote a book each, and I stayed there and traveled around the country and visited every single cocker kennel that I possibly could get into. And in 1972, I had a dog that became top gun dog in Norway, instead of sporting dog. But we kept breeding those, and then we had a lot of, and because I was into party collars when we met, and my wife was into solids more or less. So we then, when I started taking up wires on a more serious levels, we focused more on the solids, and bred some fantastic dogs over the years. So, what
was their prefix?
Hubbestad, Hubbestad, which was also the prefix for greyhounds and whippets, and Norfolk Terriers. You know, we won. So we had quite a successful run with greyhounds, more than whippets, I would say, and we bred some really nice ones, and that's how we got to know Max Magder and all this, you know.
Oh yes,
he came to visit us many times in England. So
yeah, we miss him up here. He was a character here. Yeah.
Do you know he worked for IKEA for a while?
I did know that, yes. And his brother designs furniture as well. So.
Okay.
Is it Paul Magdra? Is his brother? I think so.
Paul was his boyfriend, wasn't it?
Yeah, Paul was. I think he also had. I think his brother's name was Paul, because the lady I bought my second kennel from, Sally Verchulia, she was an English cocker person, and she used to brag about her Magdra couch. I'm like, Max designed a couch? No, his brother Paul. I'm like, oh. So.
No, but you know, I had a lot, but when I were mostly involved in cockers before I got married, I was still working and trying to improve on my exams results so I could open doors again, you know. Dogs really screwed up my marks for a little while. So when I was 22, I think I went back to school for 3 years and studied a lot of different subjects and became a headhunter and personnel expert and all that kind of stuff. But I was leaning on a lot of friends so that I co-bred with, and that I showed the dogs for them. I imported their dogs and I co-bred their dogs. In some cases, but mainly I imported them and showed them for them, you know, and taught them how to groom dogs and all that kind of.
Like you seem to have a vast array of talents of trimming and breeding and grooming. How did you learn it all? Did you ever work for anybody, or did you just?
No, I never did actually. I actually picked it up. I mean, the basic I was taught by my mentor in the other breeder. And the cocker grooming, I actually basically learned from watching, and then John Gillespie of Lochranza fame.
Yes.
Became one of my very best friends, and he was a fabulous groomer, and he stayed with us in Sweden many times and taught me all about cocker trimming, you know. I did it decently before, but I think he made me upgrade it. But then when I went to England, I was sitting watching Ernie Sharp as much as I possibly could. And the funny thing was that the first time I showed to Peter Green, when he actually dumped me in nearly every class, nothing to laugh at, it's bloody serious, man. And he, after I finished the last dog, he came in and said, "Did you ever work for Ernie Sharp?" And I said, "No, I didn't." And he said, "Would you like a job?" And I said, "I don't need a job." And but anyway, he made it up. Well, Rick actually made it up later in the day because I won Best in Show with a Norfolk Terrier that my wife had bred. So, and then I forgave him, and and the rest is history. We've been friends forever. So I have forgiven him at long run.
Well, that's good. That's good. So you basically learned just by watching people then.
Yes, and then yeah, but you know, and also I think the fact that we in Scandinavia were up against a bunch of amateurs, you know, my grooming skills were so far superior to many of the other people there. While if I'd been in America, I would have been way down the line, you know. And I also had this thing that I admire so much with the way Peter is grooming dogs. He made them look as though God made them that way. You know, if you see what I mean, they're not sculptured the way that some other people do, that they look unnatural. I like them when they look as though they are true to what, you know, as though they are created this way from the beginning. And so I learned a lot from Peter, I learned a lot from George, and learned Rick. But you know, Rick was more extreme, and for many years I loved his the extreme outline and all that kind of stuff. But I think as you get older and more sensible and more experienced, you realize you know, I love these overangulated things with long necks, but you realize the more you learn about dogs, the more you realize that modification and, you know, is something to aim for more than the extreme in the end, when it comes to health and function and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, for sure, yeah. We get drawn to those fancy ones, but when you really look at them. So if you, what advice would you give somebody if they were just starting out in dogs right now?
You know, it's very difficult for me. I think that start early. I think that this one of my arguments in life is people say, "Why are you not an all-rounder?" Because I'm still learning about the breeds I'm doing. Mm-hmm. And I have a lot of respect for breeds and breeders, but find a sound base to find. If you're lucky, you'll find some. If you go through it, you can find somebody like Peter Green or even, you know, who have a serious attitude to all this, or maybe even better, a breeder who's really dedicated and know what they're doing. And because it's not only about, you know, today it's too much about winning. Mm-hmm. I personally showed dogs for 3 or 4 years before I won anything at all, you know, because I didn't expect to win, you know, because whether I was running around with a German Shepherd or with an English Setter or with an English Cocker, there were always more people that were better at it than I was, and that you kind of expected to win. But I mean, I think learn about dogs, get into a kennel, find out what tough job it is to run a dog and keep them in condition. And we had we had quite a big kennel in Sweden and even in England. And we had all these people who thought it was working in a kennel that was patting dogs on the head, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
And when they found that they had to scrub kennels and pick up after them and all that kind of stuff, realized that this probably wasn't for them. So, and I think I worked for nothing in a poodle kennel 3 summers. And then when I was studying for my, what you call the admission test for university, I was in Oslo and worked full-time with the poodle kennels. Altogether I worked over a year with poodles. But I worked for nothing. I didn't get paid. It was just my desire to be with and work with dogs. And the scary thing is that when I wrote to breeders in Sweden or in England, we had very few breeders in Norway, the kennels and the big enough. You know, there was a waiting list for people who want to come and work there during the summer.
Wow.
In the 60s.
You have to beg them now. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's such a different scenario. But also, you know, the fact that you came into, and I feel so privileged to have met all these people and made them my friends over the years. You know, I can give you a whole list of names that have influenced my life in so many ways, and that I'm eternally grateful for that I did meet. And I don't think they'll ever be replaced. Maybe you're getting too old. But I also think that what you learn when you're young, that's when you learn, that's what you remember, that's what stays with you.
Yeah,
you know?
Sponge then, I think.
So I think that start early, and I think I always envied all these people in both England and America who were second or third or fourth generation dog breeders, because nobody in my family even had a cat. You know, I had an aunt who had a Min Pin who was named Minnie, or my mother's aunt actually, who bit everybody, and that was the only dog in the family. So when I got in, they thought it was, well, they probably were right. They thought there was something seriously wrong with me. Yeah. So I had really to fight. I didn't get any support for it. I had to save up to go to dog shows, and because I thought it was a totally waste of time. I should rather go to Sunday school.
Well, I'm glad you did what you did. What about advice? What about advice for judges, new judges?
I think that I can only say what I think myself is right. Is that, you know, whenever I give a talk about terriers, I always say this. You know, we have, you know, Wyres, Fox Terriers, and Lakelands are related. They are. If you go back in their pedigrees, you can find so many similarities. And I always say that, really and truly, if you could line up a cutout of the eyes of a Lakeland, a Welsh, and a Wyre, an Irish, and an Airedale, and you are able to identify them, then you should qualify to judge them, if you see what I mean. You should be able to see their, because they have totally different personality, yes, and they have a totally different way of looking at you, and if you can see their expression, you can also see their temperament and attitude to everything, but of course a lot of people think that's exact. But on the other hand, and I have the same with Spaniels, because, you know, I had a lot of wonderful mentors in Sparrows. I had Jimmy Cudworth and Mary Scott in Springers, and I had all these cocker ladies that with the Big and the Maryborn and Locranza and all these famous kennels that I played by my visits from time to time. And you should also know the background of these breeds, so you know what's important. What is the difference between a field spaniel and a Springer spaniel or a cocker spaniel? And when I grew up in Norway, there was a number of English cockers that looked like field spaniels, actually. But an advice to a judge is that make sure you know what you're talking about before you enter the ring. You shouldn't do it just because you have done a seminar or whatever it goes, and done all these tests that you have to do here. I think if you have, I mean, one thing that I always argued in this country is that all these handlers and assistants who have spent half their life at dog show with dog people of all breeds, they don't get enough credit for the background they have. You see what I mean?
Oh, I agree.
Because, and I mean, you work for the American Kennel Club in the office, and when you leave, you get a group or two, depending on how long you've been there. And then if you have worked your whole life as a handler, we have a wonderful lady in California who has shown dogs her whole life. one of the best dog people I've ever met. When she retired from handling, they gave her 12 terrier breeds. And there was even a campaign for signatures for the AKC to give her the group. But and I think there's the rhyme and reason, if you see what I mean. There's if you have spent 5 days a week at the dog show and then the rest of the week at home working with the dogs, if you haven't learned, you can't make that up by sitting listening to one person for half an hour at the ringside. So all these people run around with a clipboard and say, "Can you mentor me for?" And I said, "Only if you can watch the whole class or the whole breed, because you don't learn anything from watching specials. You have to watch the lower classes today."
Yeah,
but we are all different and different ambitions, and it's never been judging has never been my main object. I've always loved dogs, and I love to work with them, and I love to breed them, and I love to train them. And what gave me the biggest kick was when you had a dog that you actually brought into the ring for the first time at 6-7 months old, and they were shining. You know, if you see what I mean, they loved it, and so that was payback for a lot of hard work, and that was fantastic. But doesn't always work like that.
No. Are there any dogs that I don't want current dogs that are being shown right now, but dogs in your past that you've watched or judged that you wished you could have been a part of or had more to do with, or were just excited to see them? And any of those
I mean, I think whenever people ask me, which dogs do you remember from the past, I always say the two same dog because nothing has happened. Was a bearded collie called Edinburgh Blue Bracken, who won Best in Show at Windsor 1974, I think.
Oh yeah.
And the reason I remember him was he was standing like a statue, and just when I came over, he looked at me like, yes, in a way that he was so dignified and so.
A bearded collie, dignified.
Yeah, he was seriously, and he looked at you as though you were, I won't say a piece of, but there was the way he had this radiance about him that was unreal.
He knew he was better. Yeah.
Yeah, and the other one was when Tim Brazier went round the big ring at Westminster with Ruffian.
Yeah, Ruffian.
And which gave me goosebumps. But you know, and of course, Scarf Michael, the Kerry Blue, was another dog that was very impressive. And in Wild Fox Terriers, I think for me it's a match between Paddy. I showed him in England a couple of times. You know, Gals of Excellence.
Oh, Paddy.
And King Arthur, that won Summer Chill last year. I love that dog, you know. I happened to give him a group fourth at the National, or the day after the National, and everybody expected him to win. But, you know, they all have days, and that's what I think is so important. That, to me, a terrier has to perform. Otherwise, it doesn't matter what they look like. They have to be terriers, and they have to want to do what you want them to do.
I agree.
So that's it. But that's, you know, it's very hard. You know, you feel you're very blasé when you say that you've seen all these millions of dogs, and then it's hard to pull out a few that really make your hair stand up. But then you have also a lot of big winning dogs, and you look at them and say, what do other people see that I don't see? And that is what makes this game so fascinating. And I was fortunate enough to become very good friends with Bob Forsyth, and we played golf more or less 5 times a week the last 4 or 5 years he lived. And Janie also initially. And I remember we were sitting with Janie and Mike Billings one time, and he talked about do-overs, you know, and all that kind of stuff, and how they went out to the ring and say, what the hell did we do what we just did? And I think that happens to everybody, that you have a moment when you realize you should have done something else, and you realize it immediately when you've done it. But and I'm worried. What I'm worried about more than anything is that I get caught up in details, particularly in my own breeds.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's more apt to happen in your own breeds, because there's things that you...
Yeah, and that's also one thing that I was going to say, that when you have this thing about that I want terrier people to be able to, terrier judges to be able to identify the difference between the different breeds, and then you wonder yourself, how many breeds am I able to do that with, that I'm judging of all these 100 breeds or whatever I do? Yeah. But then on the other hand, you also know that even within your own breed, there are experts who have totally different views of what's right and what's wrong. So
yeah, it's all true.
It ain't easy, I don't think. Do you think it's easy?
I think you can learn from all these people, though. I'm an Irish setter person, and I tend to. There's so many different styles throughout the years but they've all influenced me. So it's and they all.
Yeah, you know, I happen to speak with what's his name, L.C. James in England, the Wendover guy, and he told me what and if you see the dogs they were showing compared to what you're showing here today and what you see in England today, that's a lot of difference.
Oh, for sure. But there's pieces. I always found, in England that their shoulders and head planes were always better than ours. Back when my parents were dogs. Mm-hmm. And then we would have our dogs were a little fancier, but I thought it was important to. We brought a bitch in from England. I can't remember where she was from, but she was almost like a repair shop. You know what I mean? We could take this fancy dog, and this bitch could repair what was wrong with him and what she produced, and still keep that essence that we liked about the fancy dog. But she would repair the problems that he had. But I like to be able to keep. When you think about type wise, I like to be able to keep those different things in mind when I'm thinking about looking at
and that's also one thing that has been such a subject of discussion of what defines type.
Right.
And I think, to me, type is basically an abstraction. You know, it is how things are put together, but the result is something you feel when you see, particularly when it comes to your own breeds. And I'm hopeless when, you know, I have, for instance, my pet hate in any breed are light eyes. Because I know how difficult it is to breed out. And for instance, for the terrier breeds, if you have light eyes, you lose your soul. And so immediately, when a dog comes in and, you know, it's out, you know, and I think maybe that's wrong. But I know myself from experience how difficult it is to get rid of it.
Oh, I can understand that completely. I have things about my breeds that, if they walk in and I have them, I can't even look at them. So
no, but you know, one thing that I think is so interesting in this country is that here you have people telling you all the time that we are evaluating breeding stock. When we were in Scandinavia at the judging seminar in Norway, we were told, remember, you're not psychic. You're not saying it. You are judging the product, not the potential. And I think that is a lot of truth in that, actually.
Oh, yeah, that's a good way of looking at it.
Mm-hmm. And that is, and you know, particularly when it comes to terriers, well, there's a lot of things have been arranged or rearranged. You know, it's you don't know until you breed them or whatever. So, but
okay.
So yeah.
I have one last question for you. I've kept you long.
No?
If you could meet the 20-year-old Geir, what advice would you give him?
Go back to school. No, that was when I was at the height of my interest and something like that. And it's what I think is so amazing. When I traveled around England to all these breeders who had been in dogs for ever and ever and ever. And I was 19, 20 years old. I knew it all. I tried to tell them, give them advice, and today I'm embarrassed by it, because you realize the longer you're involved here, the longer you know how little you know. and I think it's the same with the dog world. I said, my favorite slogan is, I've never met a great man who thinks he's great. I've never met a little man who knows he's little, metaphorically speaking. And that is the truth, you know. And I think it should apply to all judges, that they should be humble. And one thing that I always have reacted when people come and thank me for a win, which is of course very polite and very nice, and I feel more obliged to thank them for coming, because if I really like the dog, I'm the one who has had the pleasure of seeing this animal, and they have won because they have earned it. So that's probably nothing to thank me for, but I should rather thank them for giving me the opportunity to let them win. So, but that's my special. But I seriously think that growing up in a country like countries like Scandinavia, we were all a bunch of amateurs. We didn't have any professional people. We hadn't got any professional judges. It was all a weekend thing. When we traveled together. We partied on Friday night and Saturday night, and went to a dog show, and then drove back home Sunday night. And it was very laid back in a way that it's so different from the way you do it here. But the level of presentation and handling and all the content you see here, you don't see that anywhere else. If you watch Craft's videos from the groups and Best in Show at Craft, you realize that there's a lot of difference between Westminster and Craft when it comes to handling and presentation. And I always say that when you judge dogs in America, they are served to you on a plate. You have to find the faults, right? Because they are so well groomed in most cases. People show dogs to you, particularly in some European countries, you have to find them. You know, it's because presentation is not at all the same level, and the way they are presented and the way they handle and all that kind of stuff is so totally different. So in many ways, I think it's easier to judge in this country than it is to judge in some of these other countries, because here the dogs are giving the time and opportunity to show themselves off to the best of their ability.
And they're served to you. I like that. Okay. All right, Geir. Well, I appreciate your time. It was nice to see you.
Okay, thank you very much. Nice seeing you and nice talking.
Thank you, Geir. I really enjoyed our time together. If you like what you're seeing here, make sure you press the like, share, and subscribe button. If you want to get a hold of me at dogshowtips@gmail.com. Or if you just want to find out what's happening in Will's world, go to willalexander.net. Until next week, guys.